How do you think, what do you think our ROI on that? I think it's great because if I get one deal a year, it pays for 3 years. Have you gotten,
thank you.
like say, we're in March, have you gotten anything from it?
No,
This
no,
year.
red day, this year, like, I think we should have like, this person needs a red day.
What'd you get last
And this one maybe, like,
Yeah, you're free to take it home, go and stop right.
How are you?
how are you?
Good.
So, you know, right?
Are you comfortable?
It's like
Okay, if we can transition out, so we're about 5 minutes late starting a class. Hey Jay, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
That document.
Yeah, I mean, you don't always work with flyers. There's like,
Heather? Is this what I do? Turn this right here?
Oh, you're good.
That's good. Turn that right like that?
No, turn that back. Yeah, you want to
Red.
so it doesn't fall off. What do you want to do with it?
He's gonna get it all set up, right?
You already left.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so what are you doing?
Alright,
And did that, was there class
in our
period?
Facebook group, we're like, no, this is a matter of you, that one goes back.
Contract addendums and,
much bigger than just this one day.
I don't think there is, but, so I brought some stuff, but it's okay.
Yeah, you guys, this is like the best committee.
I know that the slideshow is on the laptop. So do you,
That was
do you
the
need like
powerful-
visual for it, or are you good?
Thank you.
Because I know the contract series is on KW.
It is?
It should be.
Okay. Now is that set up for the instructors when they come in?
That was the culture committee. It's an awesome committee.
You are doing an amazing job.
They are doing an amazing job. I just like call the meetings to order.
So, when you start your position, you did a culture committee. So you follow instructors to do that? Thank you. And just.
So I didn't write, I didn't impress you, I promise. I know, I didn't write down your meeting.
Jesse's on vacation.
Tuesday at noon. And we'll probably see if we can do it right here.
Addendums and amendments.
That's great. That's like, that's all we're doing.
That would be like the 12th, yes.
Okay.
It's more.
Cause there's a lot of people. Are you gonna send that out to the committee?
I will do that right now.
Okay.
Land,
Then I won't have to remember it. I'll do the minutes.
land, condominium, multis. If there's anything for that. If
But
not,
you're on lunch, we'll tell people.
We got it.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Condos, land, and multimodal.
Oh,
Yes.
that's here.
that is the one.
It was 80.
Thank you. Great.
You guys go to my car?
Okay, and that should go along with the slideshow, right? Great, perfect. Sorry to get started late.
It's okay.
Well, you go.
Here is a sign-up sheet, if you would so kindly do that. And this class is regarding addendums and focused on different type of property addendums. Land addendum, multifamily addendum, condominium addendum, and whatnot. But I always like to know why you came here and what you came here to learn, because I want to make sure that when you leave, whatever brought you here today is realized and satisfied. So tell me what you're hoping to walk out of here today with. Why did you come to this class? And tell me your name.
David Elliott.
David.
If you're having a listing, or a chance to have a listing of a multi or a condo, raw land,
What do you need to know?
what documents do you need, and
Okay. Anybody else? Yes,
My mother-in-law is actually thinking about buying a duplex so she can retire without a mortgage. That'd be a good deal.
okay,
What do we need to know to start pursuing her?
okay, okay, alright. Okay, next,
When might I need to use the forms?
forms. When and what? Okay,
How about what information you put on them, like how to fill them out correctly? I did an addendum, I did something, anyway, I did
Okay.
something, and
great. There's no slideshow.
No,
Okay.
I can answer my son here.
Thank you.
He is very,
Okay, in my class, you can use your phones as long as you want, as much as you want, as long as I don't hear them. Okay? So, go
Mute it.
ahead and text
Mute it.
whatever you need to do. Alright? Keep your phone on in front of you, do what you need to do your business while you're learning. That's my philosophy. Or take care of your family while you're learning.
yeah.
Is there anybody in here that has been in the real estate business more than 2 years?
Decades ago.
Decades? And then came
Ago.
back?
Ago.
Okay,
And
ago.
then back.
And then back. Okay. How many people have more than 5 transactions under their belt? Great. Okay. So I know what we need. All right. My name is Cathy Manchester. I am your designated broker. Who can tell me what a designated broker is? Yes. What's your name?
My name is Alan Taylor.
Alan.
So you're responsible to make sure that I'm compliant on any paperwork I do
Yes.
for the foreseeable future.
Yes. Yeah. Any paperwork and how you treat your clients and what you do. And yeah, the buck stops here.
Right.
Um,
And the liabilities.
And the liability, yeah, falls here. That's right. So I'm your designated broker. I've been in that role, I don't know, 3 years maybe now. I'm also your operating principal. Do you know what an operating principal is? Okay. It means Keller Williams Greater Portland is owned by 5 people. And one of them has to be an operating principal. Meaning that they're the go-between. They supervise the staff. Shannon responds to them, and they run the company on behalf of all the other investors. So there's one operating principal, the others become investors. Dottie Beaufort, since our inception, really was our operating principal for years and years and years. And she recently is trying to enjoy more of her life and retire a bit. And so I am now your operating principal, which means that the buck stops here on making sure that we do actually run profitable and have profit share, and that everybody's happy with our company, and that we run as a very high level company. So I wear a couple of different hats. I also have a team that runs almost without me and does a book of business, so that is out there as well, so I do that as well. So I've been doing this about 23 years, and do, for the last, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years, I think we average around 200, 190 transactions a year. So I've seen my share of mistakes, and I've made my share of mistakes. And my job is hopefully to sit with you so that you don't make the same mistakes I did. So, where do you find your forms? Zip forms. Now, the number one thing I want you to do, and this is your homework, because I know you haven't done this, okay? Because I could sit in a room with 100 agents, and I bet 1 out of 100 has done this. I want you to open up your zip forms over the next 48 hours, and I want you to look at each and every form that's available in zip forms and each and every item in the clause library, so that you know what's available to you. What I don't want to see is you creating a form or creating an addendum because you have a need for it when it's already created in zip forms and written by an attorney and you're not an attorney. Because we have a very unique ability in Maine. There are states throughout the country where brokers, agents, do not even write contracts. That is done by attorneys. So you show the property, you open the door, you might do a letter of intent or something, and then an attorney sweeps in and does all the rest of the work. Okay? We're very fortunate in Maine that we don't have attorneys involved in a contract most of the time. And you'll have clients that come up from other states and they go, what do you mean I don't have to have an attorney? And you don't tell them you don't need an attorney. You say, you know, we usually don't have attorneys involved in any transactions in Maine. If you feel the need to have one, you certainly can, but you know, it's not something that's typically done in Maine. You never say you don't need an attorney, don't talk to them. Although you and I both know that when attorneys get involved, it always screws it up. So, but what I don't want you to do is practice law without a license, because that's a violation. You can't do that. So be very careful. We have forms that are pre-printed for us with spaces that you can fill out everything you need. If you're trying to invent something, that's the time that you call me. But if you call me to ask me how to do something and it's in zip forms, then I'm going to be disappointed in your performance, because it's there for you. So get to know zip forms, okay? And know it regularly, because they add stuff. They change stuff. So know what's in there and have it available for you. So let's go over a couple things, and if you have your computer here and you can go to zip forms, great, please do that. I'll give you a minute to get that set up, because that will be the best way for you to learn. Okay. You're all familiar with the purchase and sale agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're all familiar with the exclusive right to sell agreement, the exclusive right to buy agreement, and you're all familiar with agency. What type of agency do we here at Keller Williams practice?
Appointed.
Appointed agency. What's that mean?
It means that even though you sign with them, they're actually signing with Keller Williams.
That's part of what it means. What else?
You're only representing one half of the buying process or selling process, not both. That's dual.
That's we do dual here at Keller Williams.
Yeah, but appointed is not dual.
It can be.
Okay.
Are you looking for
Appointed agency means that whenever anybody signs on to sign on with an agency to help them buy or sell, they become clients of the agency. They're clients of Keller Williams Realty, right? By practicing appointed agency, Keller Williams says, Ruth, I appoint you as the agent to work with John Doe. That means that you're not appointed to work with John Doe, right?
Yes.
There are companies, although they're few and far between now, that do not practice appointed agency. And what that means is Ruth takes a listing with John Doe. You've never met John Doe, but you still represent John Doe, because we don't practice appointed agency. Does that make it clearer to you of what appointed agency is? Appointed agency means the agency appoints one agent, or whoever's on the agreement, can be two, could be three, to represent a certain client. Yes?
Where you have a team, now does your team represent that client, or just one member of the team?
We still practice appointed agency because we're under Keller Williams umbrella.
Okay.
So the only people that represent that individual are written on the agreement.
Okay.
So if Ruth takes a listing and she puts my name on the exclusive right to sell agreement, then both Ruth and I represent someone. okay? If you were my buyer agent and you put your name down to represent a buyer agent,
Mhm.
then you're representing the buyer
Right.
agent, not me,
Right,
even though you're on my team.
okay.
Now, if you were a buyer agent for me and you sold the property, I would still make some money, right?
Yes.
Compensation and does not equal representation,
Right.
ever. Okay? So, the fact that I don't represent that client doesn't mean I can't get paid.
Right.
I talk to many agents who go, this client doesn't want representation, so what happens to the percentage that that I was gonna pay a buyer agent? Well, nothing. You still get it as a listing agent. Representation does not necessarily mean compensation. You can represent a client and not get paid.
That would be sad.
Now, how that could happen is if maybe you're representing a buyer and you show them a property and you go through the whole process and then you found out that there was another agent that had procured costs. So they get paid from the transaction. If you had a buyer agency agreement with him and he agreed to pay you or cause you to be paid, then you could get compensation from him. But if he was, let's say you had a buyer and he came in and said, I don't want any representation either, I just want you to help me buy this house. And you go through the whole process and then you found out that the listing agent actually had procuring costs and they take you to task, you get nothing. So compensation's different by itself. All right, so you know what appointed agency is. Now, disclosed dual agent is when one agent represents both parties. And in order to do that, not only on the exclusive right to buy or exclusive right to sell do you check off that they agree to dual agency, but there's also a form for dual agency before you go presenting or writing offers that they both need to sign. Because we want to make absolutely sure they understand there are limitations of what you can provide when you're being a dual agent. Does it make sense? Okay, so let's talk about the different forms. Go to the first, go to purchase and sale agreement, land only. Okay, so if you are writing a contract on a piece of land that doesn't have a house on it, this is the document that you use. Purchase and sale agreement, land only. And why would you want to use this document? Look down through and tell me something different that you see in here that is not the same as in a regular purchase and sale. What do you see? What's different?
With land, there's no disclosure.
There is a disclosure, but it's a different one. Let's just talk about the purchase and sale. What do you see on here that you don't see in a regular purchase and sale? Okay, first thing is the escrow agent acceptance. Actually, and that's up in the purchase price. So you still can put, oftentimes with a regular purchase and sale, you will have additional earnest money after inspections, right? That happens a lot. Obviously, you can't have it after, well, you could have it after inspections if you were doing some minor inspections with the land, but it's not as common as it is with a residential. When you go down through, let's see, deeds should be the same, prorations are the same, due diligence. Let's look at the contingencies. What is different in contingencies? Local permits? What would be important if you were representing a client to buy some land? What might you want to research for them that you wouldn't necessarily with an existing house? Wetlands is a big one, because if they're buying land, they probably want to build on it, right? What else?
Vernal pool?
Vernal pools would be a big one. Are there any vernal pools on the area? What do you need to know about those? Yes. What else?
Local zoning.
Local zoning. Yes. Is that property, let's say you have somebody who's interested in building a duplex. Is that allowed on that lot? Let's say you have somebody that says, hey, I want to clear the land and put up a barn and have my horses here. And by the way, I'm putting in an indoor arena. North Yarmouth, you can't put a building big enough for an indoor arena for recreational use, they don't allow it. Some towns, you have to have a number of acres per horse. So with a land purchase, you really need to dig in on what is the purpose for this land, what do you want to do with this land, and let's make sure you can do it after you buy it, before you get knee deep in this transaction. The big one that people don't think about is the driveway permit.
Oh, on the cut.
Yeah, the curb cut. Now, there may be a place where people have driven into that lot from the road, and you may assume that that's good for a driveway. But there's been many occasions where they go to the town, and maybe it's a state road, and they have to go to DOT, or maybe it's the town, and they go, no, there's not enough sight distance here for a curb cut. What does that mean if they said there's not enough sight distance for a curb cut?
Distance that somebody's coming over a hill, let's say, traveling, and the car is coming out, and I can't see them far enough in advance.
Right. So the DOT or the town is going to say, is it safe to put a driveway in this lot of land? And it might not be. Can you imagine if you sold this land to somebody and then they found out they couldn't put a driveway there? So they couldn't get a building permit?
And you find all this out at the town.
Right. All at the town. Or DOT if it was a state road. But you would go to the town and ask them. So, and they might, now you might have a client that wants to buy the land, but only if they can afford to build a house on there, so that their financing might be contingent upon the whole build package, right? So that's different. So you look down through, now here it is, MDOT driveway entrance permit. And on this form you need to put who pays for it, to whose satisfaction it is, and how many days they get to do it. And so make sure that you fill out the whole form. The other thing I see people doing is not reading the form. Most of your questions that you have are answered in these documents. So please read your documents long before you put them in front of a client. And then after, to know what happens if. And then financing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it tells you what happens if there's an earnest money dispute. It tells you what mediation is, when it's appropriate. And most of the answers for anything you need are right in this document. So you know if you're selling a piece of land, you have to use the purchase and sale agreement land only. Okay? Now, let's look at the sale of land addendum. Now, if for some reason you were purchasing land and you didn't have the purchase and sale land only contract, there might be times when you want to use the sale of land addendum. Okay? Maybe they're buying a large tract or an additional lot of land, or for some reason it's not included in the purchase and sale, and this addendum is available for you to check off all these things. And even so much as you might think, you know, all right, water. Yeah, there's public water here, so that's not a problem. I know there's public water on this street. Well, which side of the street is the public water on? Is there a fee to tap into the public water? There are places that they would say, okay, you need to upgrade the public water before you can put public water into that property. So you gotta pay to upgrade it 300 feet before you put it over here. Or you need to bring it across the road. There are so many things that you can run into. Land is probably the highest liability of anything you'll ever sell. We've had lawsuits that I am aware of where the wrong lot was sold. Buyers thought they were buying something, sellers thought they were selling something, it was the wrong lot. Because it's not as easy as the blue house with the pink shutters. Right?
Do I really have to list a blue house with pink shutters?
So you want to make sure, I mean, there's so much that can go wrong with land. and knowing what the zoning is for the land and what can happen and does it meet their needs. So there's just a lot of stuff that can happen on land. If somebody's breaking off a piece of land from their primary, you need to know the subdivision rules to know if they in fact can break that land off, and to understand what might need to be done. For instance, in many towns, the third house in on that private dead-end dirt road has to bring the road up to town specifications before they get their building permit. So you're riding down the road, it's plowed, you're not questioning it, and there's a lot down there for sale, and you put your client through and you buy the lot, and then they find out in order to get the building permit on that lot, they need to bring that whole road up to town specifications, which costs $200,000. So a lot to think about with land. It's tougher than a house. There's an addendum, look at transfer on shore land property. Now when you go to a closing, they're going to also have them sign an affidavit to this. But when you transfer shore land property, and this is ocean, this is coastal, you want the sellers to sign that they have not had a malfunction on their septic system within 180 days. So there's the form for that. There also is, I didn't see it in this package, but I have it in mine. Property disclosure. Look at property disclosure land only with improvements on your zip forms. Find that one. There's a property disclosure for land only, which you want to use. This one is for land only with improvements. Now, when might you use the property disclosure for land only with improvements?
When they have the water supply.
Okay, perfect example. There was a house on it, it burnt down. The land has improvements of a septic system and a well and a driveway. Those things need to be disclosed. It won't be disclosed in just a land only disclosure, would it? Because it doesn't ask you those questions. So that's when you would use the property disclosure land only with improvements. An improvement does not necessarily mean something that was built with wood. It can be the septic system, the driveway, the water system, all that. Questions on land?
Building envelopes.
Yes, building envelopes. Yes, if it's a subdivision, one of the things you need to make sure is you need to look at the subdivision plan, because on every subdivision plan, and most of them are at the town office, city hall, but if they're not, you can find them through the registry of deeds. And in the plan, it shows you the building envelope. And it shows you many other things you might see in the fine print that wasn't disclosed on the disclosure because the listing agent wasn't paying attention. You might find conditions on that subdivision plan that are important to your seller, your buyer, that you didn't know about and weren't disclosed. And as a buyer agent, it's your job to find those out, even if the listing agent doesn't. So you could have...
All houses have to be painted blue with
Oh.
pink shutters.
Yeah, it could. I'll give you a perfect example of one. In Raymond, I just looked at a subdivision in Raymond that we wanted to buy and build a house on. And in the subdivision plan, in small print, it says that all dwellings built on that property must have a fire suppression system.
Whoa.
Okay? That's $10,000 per house. to put a fire suppression system in. And why that happens is when the developer went to get his approval on the land for subdivision, his choice was to build a water retention facility that could be used in case of a fire, or to agree that all the houses built in there had a sprinkler system. Which is cheaper for the builder?
Sprinkler system.
Sprinkler system.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if you have a client that wants to buy land to build a multi-unit on, do you have to have the plans for the multi-unit in order to purchase the land, or just have to make sure you can build on it and it's for zoning purposes?
Okay, depends. If they were getting financing to build a duplex on that land, or to build a multifamily on that land, then they'd have to have everything for the bank to approve it.
Right.
You know, not only the plans, but the cost and everything, okay? If you were just, if he was paying cash for the land, no. But what you wanna make sure as your due diligence to your buyer is that what he wants to build is authorized on that land, and what additional requirements might be imposed upon him. So if I was in that situation and it was somebody who hadn't, you know, doesn't have a great history in buying land and building these items, it's their first one or their second one, I would say, hey, why don't you come down, I got an appointment tomorrow to meet with the code enforcement officer at 2 p.m., why don't you come with me? And let's make sure we get all your questions answered. So you bring them right with you to the town, and you sit down with the code enforcement officer and you say, what do I need to know about building multi-unit on this lot? The first thing you do your research with is, is the zoning okay for it? And then you have the code enforcement officer pull it up to make sure that there's nothing that you're not seeing. Like, oh no, you can't put anything but a single family down there. Or no, you need to go to planning board for any multifamily in that zone. Or no, that would make the third residence on the road, so you need to improve the road before you go there. Lots of different stuff. Yes?
I met a customer last weekend who I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to represent, who's looking for a place for their tiny house.
Mm-hmm.
That is a headache. She talked to me about all
Absolutely.
the document work she had done to try to figure it out. That is
Absolutely.
crazy.
Absolutely. Yep. And it might be the people that go, okay, I want to build a house on this lot, and I want to put an in-law in a tiny house on the same lot. Can you do that? How are you going to do that? It might, and I'll tell you, things change. In Raymond, just up the street from me, these ladies owned a house, and they built an apartment over a garage. And the code, because they could, in the zoning, they allowed a secondary dwelling. So the code enforcement officer went over to look at it, to inspect it, to give them their certificate of occupancy for that, and said, no, these got to be attached for it to be a secondary unit.
Oh, so it has to be attached to the primary.
For that particular lot, in that town, at that time. Okay? So they built something he said, I don't care if you take a 2x4 and you attach them with one 2x4, they have to be attached. So they built this beautiful walkway to go in between the units that was a Solarium, was gorgeous. So now we fast forward maybe 10 years. Same zone, same area, half a mile away. Want to get a permit to build a house and want to build a secondary dwelling. No problem. Doesn't have to be attached. You're all set. No big deal. Okay? They change all the time. Don't assume anything.
Do most of the towns here have ZBAs? Zoning
Yes.
Board of Appeals?
Yes. Yes. So, okay. So any other questions on land? Okay. Let's look at reservation agreement unapproved subdivision. This is reservation agreement unapproved subdivision. There's also one for an approved subdivision. This is, okay, we want to reserve a lot in this to be approved subdivision. We want to make sure we got the best lot for our clients, so we want to reserve it now pending approval by the town or the city or whatnot. That's when you use the reservation agreement, unapproved subdivision. Then if it's approved, you have the reservation agreement for the approved subdivision. Because all they're doing here is they're reserving the right to have a house on there or to buy a piece of land on there. They're not buying it yet, right? They're just reserving it. So that they know it's theirs, and it might be that they need reservations agreement before even the subdivision gets approved.
Mhm.
You don't know. So those are the forms for that. So now you got somebody who is buying a new construction house. They go in the subdivision, they reserved a lot, that went, they got it, now they're gonna do new construction, and from the builder they're buying this house. That's a new construction addendum. So open up your new construction addendum and let's take a look at it. If you're doing new construction, do you still need a standard purchase and sale agreement? Yes, absolutely.
I own the dirt. But isn't this a contractor, a contract with a contractor?
No, you don't own the dirt yet.
I don't own the dirt yet.
They own the dirt, they're
They-
building the house.
Okay, they own the dirt.
Oh, okay, so you're buying
A
a
package.
build package, gotcha.
Yep. Yep. So you need that purchase and sale, and then you need the new construction addendum, which says that the seller has so many days to give to the buyer and the buyer has so many days to approve.
Right.
Construction plan, material specifications, buyer's options, because they might want to upgrade instead of the standard $3,000 that they're allowed for cabinetry, they might want $6,000 cabinets. So buyer's options, buyer's allowances, and the home construction contract as defined by state law. So the contractor has to give them a home construction contract.
And they need this to get financing.
They need this so you can best protect their
Yeah,
interests.
but I'm thinking also, when they run off to the bank,
Depends, depends. They may not. They might be getting a home equity loan on their own
right,
property they own now to finance this. They might not be financing it. But you, as part of your due diligence, have to make sure that you have that new construction addendum. Because it covers so many things that you're not covered in the regular purchase and sale. And that the actual contractor's home construction contract, that is a requirement by the state of Maine. And the builder should have that. And it's your job to review that and know that. Multifamily, rental property. What would be different about if you have a client that's buying a 4-unit apartment building? What do you need to be concerned about? What's different than just buying a regular single family?
leases.
Leases. Are there leases? What are they paying? Are there security deposits? What are the security deposits? What happens to the security deposits, by the way, when you transfer ownership? Do they stay with the owner or do they go with the property?
They should go to the property.
They go with the property. What happens with leases? Do they terminate automatically? No, they go with the property.
Yeah.
So this multifamily rental property addendum talks about all those things that you need to know. These are made for your protection so that you don't get in trouble and sell something without the proper agreements and disclosures. And it talks about things, okay, do you prorate the rent? Do you not prorate the rent? And I would tell you, my caution to you would be, we just had one that came up. Buyer has a multifamily under contract. It's a 4-unit, I believe. Getting close to the closing, and the seller says, hey, the tenant in apartment 1 isn't gonna be out until 10 days after closing. Hope that's okay. Will that be okay? The contract says it's gonna be vacant because they're planning on renting that to somebody they know. Or the tenant, they didn't like the tenant, hadn't paid their rent or whatever, but they wanted that tenant out. They negotiated that in the contract, and then the seller says, oh, by the way, they'll be out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, good luck.
What's your advice to your client gonna be? Let's give them a 2-week extension and tell them the property has to be vacant and broom clean before closing, just like the contract says. Or let's tell them, in this case, the buyer has already given notice to their current housing situation. The tenants that are moving with the buyer already, they got their tenants ready to go, have given notice. So you've got all these people that are prepared to move in here on April 1st, and the seller calls and says, oh, 2 of the apartments aren't gonna be vacant on April 1st. You got a serious problem.
Guess who's gonna be renting hotel rooms?
So, yeah, so in this stuff, if you do your addendums, it covers all that, so your chances of these issues are much slimmer. Let's talk about mobile homes. Is a mobile home real estate?
No, not unless if it's attached.
Perfect, not unless it's attached. So if a mobile home is on leased land in a park, it's personal property being sold. Now, the one thing I tell you with personal property is that nowhere in the state law does it allow me as your designated broker to hold earnest money in my escrow account that I currently have for real estate if it's earnest money on personal property.
You can't.
So if you collect $500 earnest money on a mobile home in a park, I can't mix that with my escrow funds. I don't want to have it. My preference would be, don't take any earnest money on private property.
Right.
But if you have to, it has to be held someplace else. Now, I notice our MCA did hold one someplace else this month. That's okay, but I hate to add that added work. I'd much rather have an attorney hold the earnest money on a private property, or not have any earnest money on a private property. But, so here's an addendum, mobile home on leased land addendum. Is there an occasion where you have bricks and mortar, 2x4 construction on leased land? Does that ever happen?
Camps happen.
Absolutely. Huh?
Camps happen like that.
Camps, yeah, they're on, forestry land that SD Warren owns, or, there's tons of those.
Right.
In New Gloucester, there's a lot of them on the property that the Shakers own on Sabbath Day Lake, and they lease the land for $1 for 50 years or whatever. So you have to make sure that in the deed they own the land. And if it's leased land, then you use the addendum. And you check with the financing, because getting something financed that's on leased land sometimes can be a challenge, or at least not your typical normal loan.
So if somebody wanted a construction contract on a very nice camp, lakeside camp, up in the North Woods on leased land, getting the financing is gonna be challenging.
Could be challenging. Yeah, might have to be the local bank that does it all the time up there. That's usually, local banks are great for different types of financing that you can't get elsewhere. Condominiums are another thing. There are many condominium projects that don't meet the requirements of FHA, and don't meet the requirements of a conventional mortgage. And so those have to be financed elsewhere. And local banks are great at financing those. I bought one in Wells years ago that couldn't be financed traditionally, but Benefit Saco did it because they do them all the time down there. Let's go to condominium resale certificate. When you're dealing with a condominium project that's already in existence, it's already been built, there's several people living there, the condominium resale certificate needs to be filled out by the association. Usually there's a cost to that. So you need to determine who is going to pay for that. And then this form they'll need to do for financing. But But it's also, even if there's not financing, you should use this, even if you guys paying cash. Because it really spells out what the reserves are, what the costs are, who provides what, who does the insurance. So you really wanna use that condominium resale certificate. And you're probably gonna have to, your buyer's probably gonna have to pay for that, or the seller. So you should determine upfront who's gonna pay for the condominium resale certificate.
Where does that usually run?
Depends on the association. Sometimes they're free because it's the backyard association and they're not charging anything.
Correct.
Sometimes it's a management company that's charging $500 for it. And you can't use somebody else's, that you gotta have them specific to that transaction. So then you look at condominium addendum resales. Okay, so this is again, the existing condominium that your client is buying into or you're selling for your client, and you use the addendum. And this really makes it clear how much the fees are and what the fees pay for. So that there's no question down the road. Now, if you have a brand new condominium project that nobody's ever lived in yet, then you're gonna deal with the condominium addendum receipt of public offering statement. And there's a whole Maine Condominiums Act. And if you're dealing with condominiums, it would be great for you to take a look at that and understand what it takes. I'll tell you, as a new agent, I would not recommend that you by yourself represent somebody who's just turning a project into condominiums. There's too many moving parts there. Hook up with somebody that's done it before and follow them and co-list it with them, or whatever you need to do. I wouldn't recommend that you take that on yourself. There's too many things to think about. But know that if they do that, there's an offering statement that has to go. And if you get somebody, they bought an 8-unit and they want to turn them into condominiums, there's so many regulations about, they can't just evict those tenants, you know, there's the state laws, there's town ordinances, city ordinances, so many moving parts that you just want to go with somebody that's already done that.
And the new laws in Augusta that they're talking about passing are gonna be more stringent.
Yes, yes, and if there's one thing that I could advise you, I know that until you're associate broker, you don't need the credit hours, but if there's one class that I could tell you that you strongly wanna take every year that's a credit hour class, is the new laws.
Offered here or outside?
Offered, Linda, I choose to take it from Linda Gifford every year, wherever she is. She's the legal representative of MAR. She's owned a title company for years. She's absolutely brilliant. She's also the one that answers your questions when you call the Realtor hotline.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody not know what the Realtor hotline is? Okay. She's the one that answers the questions on the Realtor hotline. She's so knowledgeable. She is in the State House all the time, knowing what's being passed, what's not being passed, what bills are putting on the floor. She's a world of knowledge, and every year you should go to her class. Because you need to know what new laws are there, what new laws are coming, what has changed, and what new forms are coming. So if there was one class you went to, that would be it. To cover yourself and what you want to know. So almost every big issue that you can get yourself into trouble with is covered by an addendum that's already in zip forms. The reason that it's in there is probably somebody messed up and we needed to fill that need. So instead of making all those mistakes yourself, make sure that you use the right form. And I'll tell you, if you mess up and you haven't used the correct form or addendum, then going to our insurance company is going to be a challenge because we have errors and omissions insurance, but you have to use the correct forms. Sometimes with our new policy, we can even get by with absolutely no deductible. But it's up to you on how you need to mitigate your own risk that way and help our insurance company protect you and help me protect you. And that is understanding what is available to you as a resource, not becoming your own attorney and using those services. Now, there's a clause library I want you to look at too. That's not what this class is about, but you need to be familiar with those clauses so that you can use them to protect yourself. For instance, you're writing a contract on a house, and your client's putting 50% down. So it's contingent upon them getting a loan for 50% of the value. You wrote the offer at 300. The appraisal comes in at 275. How's your client gonna feel about that?
Probably that they offered too much.
Are they gonna wanna continue with that sale, do you think? Maybe not.
Perhaps not.
If you had put nothing in the contract about the property needing to appraise at or above the value, the purchase price, is your client protected?
No.
Because their financing
It's not,
is only 50% of the purchase price. Can they get that? Probably.
Sure, I can get it.
Yeah. So they can't get out on financing. They're not gonna be very happy with you if you didn't protect their interest by putting a clause in that the house had to appraise.
Unless the wife is in love, then he'll close.
But they still want a reduction of that price. Now, if you had put in a clause in that it needed to appraise, then at least you could go back to the seller and say, Mr. Seller, it didn't appraise. Let's come to some agreement here.
We're talking about the due diligence period, right? Or after the due diligence period?
It would be typically longer than the due diligence.
Okay.
And that's why when you look in the clause library, there's one in there about contingent upon appraisal. Because appraisal is gonna take 30 days. 21 days, you're not gonna have the appraisal within your time period for due diligence. So that's separate from everything else
Where's the
Right.
clause library?
in the zip forms.
Is that just listed under addendum for, appraisal?
It's probably appraisal contingency. It's probably listed, can you pull that up? Just give us an example of some of the clauses that are in there. Read us some of those.
So if you go, did you guys find it? If you go under, what is that, TXN? Did you find it? So up on the top, where it says view forms, new, import, export, delete, set status, view, RPR, and then there's TXN tools, it looks like a little wrench. If you click down from there, it says clause manager,
Okay.
and then there are all the ones that she's talking about.
So
she
give
goes
us,
through-
just read us a couple of them,
So-
not the whole clause, but just tell us what there are.
Oh, here's, 1031, like kind exchange buyer, seller, acreage appraisal, due diligence, flood insurance, permitted use, right of first refusal. Those are the ones you're talking about, right?
Yep. You know, if you're coming across the need for an additional, this contract is contingent upon X, chances are somebody walked before you and we already have a clause for that. You need to use it.
So, this is in the purchase and sale that we're finding these clauses, right?
Or they could be, you add on a blank addendum, you could be adding them on a blank addendum that goes with the purchase and sale.
Okay. Where, I'm gonna have to find out where to find these in there.
Yeah, you can scoot over and look at their computers and they'll show you where. So, the worst form in zip forms, the most dangerous form in zip forms is the blank addendum. Because it tells you that you should be able to write your own addendum. And that's not the case, okay?
Don't do it.
Don't do it. And if you get a clause, you're the listing agent, and a buyer agent sends you a form, and it says on the, let's say you have an addendum, a blank addendum, and the agent wrote, this contract's contingent upon financing. Or no, this contract's contingent upon appraisal. That's what they wrote on the blank addendum. What's the problems with that?
there's no specification.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you pull up the clause for addendums, Ruth, and tell us what it is for appraisal?
This agreement is contingent on buyer obtaining an appraisal from an appraiser licensed to do appraisals in the state of Maine within blank days of the effective date of this agreement, indicating the current market value of the property to be equal to or greater than the total purchase price set forth in paragraph 5. But then there's like 3 more paragraphs of information.
Okay. All that's not covered in that simple statement. So if you're the listing agent and an agent gives you a clause like that, which they will, you bring it to your seller and you go, look, here's what they proposed, but I want to tell you some of the problems that might arise because this isn't clear. Here's what I recommend we use. If we're going to let them make it a contingent upon appraisal, let's use this. Now, if your client says, okay, but I want to scratch this line, is that okay? Yes.
Yeah.
Your client can scratch anything they want.
You just can't add.
And they can add, but you can't come up with that verbiage. You're not an attorney. Do we do it? Yes. Lawyers do it all the time. Should we do it? No. If it ends up if it ends up in court and we get sued, are we going to get called on the carpet? Probably. So use your clause addendum. Use your addendums that are already in there for you. And your situation is probably not unique. There's probably something in there that can help you.
How do you document that a client is scratching lines on the form in case, like, or adding, in case it does go to court and they say, oh, well, my agent did that?
Their initial is next to it.
Okay.
Whenever you change a contract in any way, there it is initialed. And if you have, let's say you have a binding contract, okay? Let's say you have a signed contract and the buyer is supposed to give an additional $5,000 earnest money after inspections. And they do the inspections, and then the buyer and seller, through both of you as agents, decide that that's not really important. The seller doesn't care if that comes in, the buyer doesn't care if that comes in. So you take the contract and you go back to the buyer and have them scratch that out and initial it, and you take the contract and you go to the seller and you have them scratch that out and initial it, and then it's valid. One initial doesn't make it valid. And then there's all sorts of other ones. Sale of property addendum, if under contract. Sale of property addendum not yet under contract. Kick-out clause. All those forms you need to be intimately familiar with so that you know, right like that, what you need. And you're not creating it on your own so as to get sued. Make sense? Okay, so did I tell you what you needed for docs?
Yes.
Yes. We know the forms, the info, how to fill those out, what to help with buying a multi. First, you're looking at a multi, and the numbers are a big deal. Anything on that disclosure, and you want to make sure there's a multifamily addendum with it so you know the real deal. And then your job as a buyer agent is to confirm that information is correct. If they're saying that their tenant on the first floor is paying $700 a month and they have an $800 deposit, then when you're there and the first floor tenant happens to be there, you go, I just want to confirm, how much were you paying for rent here? Did you have a security deposit? I can't tell you how many times you're going to get a different answer.
Just out of curiosity, how does that work? Because the security deposit is typically going to be an escrow. Do you just set up your own escrow account to take the current tenants?
Yep, and at closing, the seller gives the buyer the security deposits.
Right, and you just put them into your own escrow.
In your own escrow.
Got it.
Yep, yep. So if I was selling a multi, or if I was a buyer agent and I had a client buying a multi, I'd want to, number one, make sure it's a legal unit. So you confirm that at the town. Make sure that, you're obviously going to do your due diligence with building inspection and all that as well.
Right.
But you want to make sure that, yes, the rents are what they say they are, the expenses are what they say they are, and the security deposits are what they think they are.
You're also gonna wanna make sure that terms of utilities are what they say.
Terms of utilities, that's why you wanna see the leases.
Yeah, if they tell you that heat and hot water is not
Yep,
included.
also, who owns the refrigerator and the stove in each unit? Who owns the washer dryer? So there's a lot of moving parts when you're dealing with tenants that you wanna make sure that you have, and that you've crossed all the Ts and dotted all the Is. Any questions that you have that I didn't answer?
No, a lot more questions will come up when we're
Absolutely.
approached with.
So when you have questions, the first thing I want you to do is refer back to zip forms and your clause to see if it's already there. Actually, the first thing I want you to do is read your contract. Because I love to talk to you and I love to deal with issues. What I don't want to do is go, okay, have you read paragraph 8 of the contract? And have you go, no? Okay, pull it out and read it. Oh, there's my answer.
I have a question. So if we know that our client wants to buy like a multi-unit, we can go into Dotloop and it will show us all the forms we need, correct?
Does Dotloop have all the forms you need?
No.
Not necessarily.
Will it list all the
Zip
ones that?
forms.
Okay.
Zip forms.
Yeah.
I just mean like it'll tell us which ones that we
Which
will
ones
need
you
to
need.
collect.
Yes.
Okay.
But you still want to have a working knowledge of what's available, because it won't tell you in Dotloop that, hey, you should use an appraisal clause in here because your client's putting 50% down,
Right.
and you want to protect them. It's not going to tell you the stuff that you might need. Oh, this land has, it's not going to tell you, oh, the land has a well and a septic on it, so you need to use the addendum for a land with improvements.
Right.
It's not going to tell you that stuff. It's going to say, this is the minimum requirement of what you need to turn in to be in compliance. But there's no way that we can know all the issues with your particular transaction and make sure you have all that. It's just not there. For instance, let me give you a perfect example. When you do the checklist, it says that you'll have a deed that shows that the sellers own the land, right? Well, we didn't know the client died.
Oh, and then you got a PR.
All right? So now what do you need?
The death certificate?
Yeah, death certificate, and maybe more than that. It might have had to go to the courts already and be prorated. Not prorated, probated. But we don't, there's no way we would know that. You give us a contract that has joint tenancy, right? And only the woman has signed the exclusive right to sell.
No.
Like, hey, you can't do that. Oh yeah, here's the divorce decree that says that she has the authority. So we're not always gonna know what you need to have,
Right.
and they'll slip through. If it looks like it meets compliance and we don't have all the information, you're gonna get the okay, but you still could be wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's really important for you to understand everything so that you know you have everything. You know, if you get a land contract that sails through and you haven't gotten a permit for the driveway, we're not gonna know. We'll find out down the road when the attorney calls me. And then I'm gonna call you.
Would that be an
Attorney calls me.
admission circumstance, or would that be client didn't do their due diligence? Or is it up to the court?
It would be up to the court, but it's not the client.
No, it's us.
Yeah, okay.
It's you. And you know why it's us? Because we have the insurance and we're the deep pockets, so they'll come to us.
Right.
And there's
that's our
just not
job
works.
as
That's
Feel
your
better,
job. Your job is to protect the fiduciary of your client.
That's what they pay us.
And that's what they pay you the big bucks for. And you need to make sure you do it. And I didn't have time isn't gonna cut it. And let's just really quickly, before I let you go, on the contract it says that you have a certain number of days on the inspections. Okay, those are business days. So you need to make sure that you count those. So if I put something on a contract today and I had 5 business days, when would the 5th business day be? Wednesday 1.
Yeah.
When is day one?
Today.
Tomorrow.
No,
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Day one is tomorrow. Effective day's today. Day one is tomorrow. Tomorrow's a Friday. Saturday, Sunday don't count.
Right.
Then Monday would be day 2. Tuesday would be day 3. Wednesday would be day 4. Thursday, at what time?
5.
5 o'clock would be day 5.
5.
So,
But
if
if
is it 5:30?
No, 5 p.m.
Oh, 5 p.m., yes. So if I sent at 4 p.m. an addendum, an inspection contingency addendum, that says seller needs to replace the septic system prior to closing, and have my seller sign it under the inspections, what happens if we don't get the seller to sign it? I'm representing the buyer, I sent that forward. What happens if the seller doesn't sign it by 5 p.m.?
Offers no good.
No,
Yeah.
What? It's not good.
the extension, or the request to get whatever DSG.
So what happens?
They have to buy it that way.
They waived their right to those contingencies, didn't they?
Right.
Mhm.
If it's not full resolution in writing. Same thing with an extension. I had an agent last week who said, well, they said the extension was fine. They gave me an extension. Show me a copy. Oh, no. They told me it was okay. They emailed me and said, yes, we could have an extension. Show me in writing the extension. Well, there isn't one. I didn't get one. Well, then you screwed up. Because you don't have an extension unless you have an extension.
Right.
They told me it was okay, doesn't cut it. And the broker can't do that. It has to come from the client.
It has to be a signature from the client.
Yes. So if I had an issue like a septic system needed replacement, and I knew that there's no way the sellers could make a decision in the time span that I've left them with, then I'm gonna put in there that, or they give an extension for 10 days. Cause I know the seller's gonna need some time to find some estimates and think about that.
Right.
If they don't sign and you write it up, so if they don't sign the extension or the agreement, then contract's null and void. And you're starting from scratch. Now that's tough because your client might say, you know what, I'm gonna ask for a new furnace, but this is a screaming deal. If they don't give it to me, I want the property anyway. Then you put it in there and you don't put that the contract is null and void, and you let them know, look, they might say yes, they might say no, they might say nothing. If they say nothing, that's a no and you bought the property. So communicate early, communicate often is the means to a positive end there. Ruth?
So since we're all newbies in this room, I've been dealing with one agent who's not the Carol Williams agent. We're doing a closing tomorrow, and he's very seasoned, but it's interesting because I've been following the letter to, this is the addendum that needs to be signed, and he's like, well, no, I want this addendum. So like, it's been very interesting because he knows that this is my first transaction, but it's been very, no, this is the way I have been told to do it. You need to have your seller sign this as well. Well, we can just do it via email. No, I need this. So it's been interesting because when you say
And you will come
down
across
the
agent
side,
that you go, oh my God.
yeah.
Well, they're playing you. No,
Well, it's not even that they're playing you,
Some
they're
could
just
just
lazy.
be comfortable with not doing it right.
Right.
Doing it
Right.
wrong.
And you go, oh my God.
Yeah.
They've
So-
just not been caught yet.
Right.
You don't wanna get caught with them.
Right, I have a
Don't
very
get
sales
caught.
leader who I have spent just a lot of time asking her, is this right, is this right? So if you don't have somebody like that, I would recommend getting somebody like that.
Which is anybody here in their first 90 days? Okay, are you in productivity coaching?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, so you do
Go
have
there.
somebody.
You
Yeah.
We have lots of somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have
Yeah,
lots of
lots of
somebodies.
somebodies.
And you understand that a designee of the designated broker, like Helen in the productivity coaching, has to initial every document that you do for the first 90 days.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Now,
Okay.
is this
Don't
the
be
first
afraid to
90
ask
days
for
of your
questions.
license or the first 90 days of the Keller?
Keller.
That's the
Licensed.
group first.
Licensed.
Okay.
I have
Yeah.
to excuse
Licensed.
myself.
That's the law.
That's the thing.
And don't
Thank
be
you very
afraid to
much.
ask her questions.
No.
Like the lady that I called, I'm like, okay, this is a stupid question. It's like, no.
There are no stupid questions. Yeah.
Because if you don't get it right, Helen's not gonna be in trouble, you will be. And
Right.
that, yeah. So it's been very
Yeah.
interesting.
So, questions. If you have any questions, give me a call. You can email me anytime at dbmain@kw.com or my email that's listed in command. If you have an absolute immediate need, the best thing to do is text me. And if you don't get an answer from me immediately, you know that I'm out with something and you might want to reach out to another designee. But my emails often don't get checked till the end of the day, and sometimes if I get a really late day, they don't even get checked that day. Because I'm not dealing with contracts on a regular basis.
Do you have a card so I can enter you my contact?
No, but I can do it with my phone.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Although
Thank you
that
very
wasn't
much.
working yesterday, we figured out.
All right, let me just, I'll pull up my contact and here. I'll just do share contact and you can text your number in and I'll share it with you. So just text your number in there, 207, whatever, and I'll share that contact with you. Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Stay out of trouble.
Thank you.
Thanks.
How did you do it?
Okay.
She just texted me the contact.
Yeah, so I'll share contact there, and just type your name in there, type your number in there, and I'll share that contact with you.
Did you hit send or anything?
Yep. Yeah, all right, sure.
Thank you.
My pleasure.